On January 12, 1944, at 14:07 hours, an American artillery battalion fired a perfectly normal fire mission at a German crossroads in Italy. They were supposed to hit a column of infantry and trucks. They hit a farmhouse, and the family that didn't get out in time. Captain Daniel Keene heard the mistake before the radios caught up. He was standing outside his fire direction center, a waist-high bunker of sandbags and wet timber, when the first shells landed 200 yards short of where they were supposed to. The ground thumped. A tile roof in the distance jumped, folded, and went up in a dirty blossom of dust. Through his binoculars, he saw chickens explode into white panic, a mule rear and tear loose, and a man in a brown jacket hurl 2 children into a ditch with a speed you only had when you understood what incoming sounded like. The last shell fell directly on the corner of the house as the man tried to follow them. The German trucks they were trying to kill were still rolling along the road beyond, silhouettes in the haze, just out of reach. Splash, over, the observer's voice crackled a second later in Keene's headset, cheerful and professional. "Splash my ass," Keene muttered. "You're late and you're blind." He keyed his own mic. "Adjust fire, right 400, add 200, over." There was a pause. "Roger. Adjust. Right 400, add 200, the battery replied. Behind him, 6 M2 155mm howitzers sat in a neat staggered line, their barrels already slewing to new bearings. The crews moved like men in a factory. Load, ram, close, fire. The second volley went out. 6 shells, 6 arcs, scratching the gray Italian sky. They would land in roughly the right area over the next 10 or 15 seconds. The Germans, who had heard the first rounds, were already jumping off the road and diving into ditches, functionally invisible to the fragments by the time the rest of the salvo walked in. The farmhouse, what was left of it, took the full weight of American correction. It was standard. It was doctrine. It was, Keene thought as the dust rose, a painfully expensive way to scare dirt and kill the wrong people. Back inside the fire direction center, the war shrank to paper and numbers. The dugout smelled of wet wool, cigarette smoke, oil, and eraser shavings. Charts were pinned under dim bulbs. A battered copy of the firing tables lay open next to a slide rule and a stack of message pads. Sergeant Morales, his chief computer, looked up as Keene ducked in, brushing mud off his coat. "How bad?" Morales asked. Keene didn't answer immediately. He watched his own hand put the headphones down very carefully, as if they might break. "We killed a mule," he said finally. "We ruined someone's year of cheese. And unless I read that plume wrong, we just made 3 or 4 people civilians in name only." Morales grimaced. "Bad map?" he asked. "Elevation error? Wind?" "No," Keene said. "Timing error." He tapped the big steel clock bolted to the wall. "We hit where they were, not where they are." He flipped open the logbook, scanned the last few missions. The pattern never changed. Observer calls in a target. His team checks map coordinates, range, charge, elevation, deflection. They send fire commands with allowances for barrel wear, charge lot, air temperature. Guns fire as soon as they're ready. Shells arrive roughly together. Ish. The enemy, not being idiots, has long since learned that the first round is a warning. By the time the rest of the salvo walks in, they're flat in the ditch, behind a wall, gone into the trees. On paper, artillery was the king of battle. Most days, watching dust jump 10 seconds too late, Keene thought it felt more like an expensive way to cultivate craters and apologies. Before the war, Dan Keene's idea of a hard day was explaining calculus to freshmen who thought limits were a suggestion. He'd been a math lecturer at a small college, chalk on his cuffs, double-checking other people's equations for fun. Most of his colleagues pulled into uniform ended up in quiet buildings far from the front, doing ballistics, computing trajectories for shells they would never see. Keene had requested a line unit. If someone's going to do the math that gets men killed, he'd told the interview board, I'd rather be close enough to see whether the math was worth it. The Army, to his surprise, had agreed. They made him a battery officer, then fire direction officer, then gave him 3 batteries and told him to make them obey the book. The book said artillery was powerful because of volume. If you threw enough iron into an area, the enemy feared the area. But fear wasn't the same as loss. Random shelling pinned men down, scared them, made them hug the earth or then hate you. It did not reliably take them off the board. It didn't stop them regrouping 10 minutes later and walking into the next village. Keane didn't want fear. He wanted disappearance. And after that farmhouse, he wanted something else just as badly. He wanted the right people to disappear. That night, in a lull between missions, the dugout was too quiet. Outside, the gun sat black against a sky that flickered with distant lightning and nearer flashes. Somewhere out in the dark, the man in the brown jacket was either a red mark on a report or a story someone's children wouldn't get to tell. Inside, the clock on the wall ticked louder than the war. Keane sat alone at the plotting table with coffee that had given up on being hot and was halfway to being mud. He opened the firing tables to a familiar page. Range, charge, quadrant elevation. Standard corrections for temperature, powder, barrel wear. The tables had been written by men who loved math, but they had a blind spot he couldn't stop seeing now. Time. Each gun had its own personality. Tiny delays that doctrine pretended didn't exist. Gun crews loaded faster or slower depending on how tired they were. Barrels warmed at different rates. Some fuses ran just a hair slow, some a hair fast. Every mission was an orchestra trying to hit the same note with no conductor, each musician guessing when to blow. The solution everyone used was, accept the noise. Fire enough shells, and you get a nice, beaten zone. If you happen to put that beaten zone over a farmhouse instead of a road, you write regrettable collateral damage in a report. You swear, you smoke, you move on. Keane stared down at the tables, at the neat columns pretending the world behaved exactly as printed. What if we stopped pretending soon was good enough, he said quietly, to the clock. He flipped to the back of his personal notebook. On a clean page, he wrote 3 letters at the top. TOT, time on target. The phrase existed in doctrine as a vague suggestion. If possible, it is desirable to have rounds arrive nearly simultaneously to maximize surprise. In practice, battalions were too busy, too disorganized, too tired. The observers were grateful if rounds landed within 50 yards and 15 seconds of where they'd asked. Nobody out here had time to add extra math to chase a nice idea. Nobody except a man whose brain twitched every time he saw survivors crawling out of a ditch he'd given them 10 seconds to reach, and bodies in houses that had never moved at all. He began to scribble. Time of flight from gun to target was a function of range, charge, and ballistics. The tables already gave that. At 8,000 yards on charge, 5, maybe 27 seconds. At 10,500 yards, maybe 32. He could look at a range and read off, this shell will be in the air X seconds. If he knew how long each gun's shell would fly, he could work backwards. If every shell was to arrive at T-0 on the target, then the gun whose shell took 25 seconds needed to fire at T. 25. The one with 31 seconds of flight needed to fire at T 31. Add the human delay from fire to actual firing, crew reaction, ramming, closing breech, hitting the lanyard, and you got an ugly little correction factor per gun. Ugly, but measurable. He looked up at the big steel clock again. Artillery units synchronized watches. In theory. In reality, synchronized meant close enough for government work. He didn't want close enough. He wanted all the watches in his battalion to agree so precisely that 18 shells could pass the same invisible point in the sky within the time it took a man in a yard to blink. He flipped the notebook page and wrote in annoyed, block letters, "We don't have a time problem. We have a laziness problem." The next morning at 09 Ward, he started being a problem about it. "Gentlemen," he announced, standing outside the dugout with a line of battery officers and senior NCOs in front of him, "we are going to learn to tell time." "Sir, with respect," Morales said cautiously, "we already—" "To the second," Keene said. "Not about 5 past. Not more or less the same as yesterday. To the second." There were groans. One corporal actually craned his neck to look for some more immediate threat, like a tiger tank. Keene held up his watch. "You see this?" he said. "Set yours to mine, right now. When I say mark, you press your crown. Mark." A small chorus of clicks. "Tomorrow we do it again," Keene went on. "And every day. After. And before every planned mission we care about." "Sir, what difference does 3 seconds make?" someone muttered. "Ask the man in that farmhouse," Keene said, sharper than he meant. The muttering stopped. "Next," he continued, tone flattening back into business, "each gun is going to run timing drills. I'm tired of guessing how slow you are." There were nervous laughs. "We will fire single practice rounds at a fixed elevation and charge and measure. From my fire to your muzzle blast. You will do it enough times that I know your average crew delay within half a second. Then we will do it again when you swap crews. If you speed up, the table changes. If you slow down, the table changes." Morales winced. "Sir, are you trying to make us hate you?" "Yes," Keene said. "Because if this works, the Germans are going to hate me more, and that's the only opinion I care about." The timing drills were miserable. Guns boomed at an empty hillside, while men with stopwatches stood behind sandbags, counting out seconds. "Fire. 1 and 2 and 3 muzzle flash. Stop." Numbers went into Keene's notebook. "Gun 1, average crew delay 3.6 seconds. Gun 2, 4.1. Gun 3, with the slowest loader in Italy, 4.9. He shuffled crews, made them do it again. The delays shrank and clustered as pride kicked in. "Congratulations," he told one section dryly. "You've just proven you can be slightly less useless if someone's timing you." By evening, he had a crude table. For each gun, at each common range, a total of time of flight plus crew delay. He stared at the columns until the numbers started to feel like potential instead of punishment. The first chance to test it came sooner than anyone liked. 3 days later, an observer called from a ridge overlooking a walled farm complex that the Germans had turned into a staging point for their local counterattack. "Target is enemy infantry and vehicles in farm compound. Grid 7423, the voice crackled over the net. "Heavy movement in yard. Trucks, at least a company of men. Recommend battalion mission, over." Normally, Keene would have nodded and done what everyone did. Adjust round or 2 to get close. Fire for effect. Let shells leak into the target area over half a minute. Kill some men, wound some others, blow some walls down, scatter the rest. Live with the knowledge that anyone quick enough and lucky enough to hit a ditch on the first whistle had a fair chance of swearing at you later. Today, he looked at Morales. "Get the range solution," he said. "We're doing it." Morales blinked. "Doing." "Time on target," Keene said. "Whole battalion, full fire for effect." Morales swallowed. "That's 18 guns, sir. 3 rounds each. That's a very bad second for somebody." "Good," Keene said. "Let's finally make 1 second matter more than 30. The dugout snapped into focus. Maps and rulers, bearings and ranges, charges for all 18 guns. Keene flipped through his homemade timing tables, finger racing down the columns. Battery A, Gun 1, flight time 27 seconds, crew delay 3.5. Gun 2, 26 seconds, 3.8. Battery B, different range, different times. Battery C, the furthest out, longest flights. He chose an H hour out loud so everyone could hear. Time on target, 14:23 or more. Now he worked backwards like a man defusing his own bomb. H minus flight time minus crew delay. When each gun had to actually fire, his pencil flew across message pads. Battery A, fire at 14:22:29. Time on target, 14:23 R. Battery B, fire at 14:22:26. Battery C, fire at 14:22:33. Morales read over his shoulder, lips moving as he checked the arithmetic. "Sir," he said quietly, "if we're wrong, this is going to be one very expensive math error." "If we're right," Keene said, "nobody in that yard gets a chance to run for a ditch, including anyone like the man in the brown jacket, if the observer picked the wrong grid again. So let's be right." They pushed the fire orders out. "Battalion, this is able fire direction," the radio crackled. "Time on target mission. 3 rounds per gun, high explosive, fuse quick. Check your watches. Time check. Mark." Dozens of hands pressed crowns. Dozens of eyes watched second hands tick. Outside, crews hunched over their guns, shells ready, lanyards in hand. At 14:22:26, far off through the trees, Battery B's 6 guns spoke, orange tongues punching the air. At 14:22:29, Battery A. At 14:22:33, Battery C. 18 shells clawed their way up into the overcast sky, arcing toward one farmyard. On the ridge, the forward observer lay with his binoculars trained on the compound. He saw men carrying ammo boxes, a truck reversing, figures clustered near a doorway, smoking. One of them checked his watch, bored. The observer heard the faint, scattered cough of American guns. He glanced at his own watch. 14:22:45. They don't look worried, he thought. They had learned, like everyone else in this war, that the first incoming round was a sermon, not a sentence. Hear the whistle, hit the dirt, swear, wait out the rest. At 14:23, so there was no first round. There was just a second in which the world inside the walls ceased to make sense. 18 shells arrived so close together that the observer's brain processed them as one prolonged, tearing crack. Roofs did not get hit. They disappeared. The yard became a cloud of dirt, smoke, and splinters that punched straight up and then boiled outward. A truck jumped, twisted, fell wrong, and turned into jagged metal. Men who had been standing, walking, shouting a heartbeat earlier were simply gone, replaced by heaving shapes and nothing that looked like running. On the ridge, the observer flinched, mouth open. "Holy," he started, then remembered to key his mic. "Battalion, this is Observer 1, his voice came through, slightly too high. "Target is comprehensively destroyed. No observed movement in compound. Repeat, no movement. You boys do birthday parties?" In the Fire Direction Center, a ragged cheer went up. Someone thumped the table. Someone else whistled, low and impressed. Morales turned to Keene with wide eyes. "Sir," he said, half laughing, half scared, "remind me never to owe you money." Keene didn't cheer. He sat very still, one hand on the edge of the plotting table, listening to the tick of the clock catching up with the echo of that second. "That," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else, "is what artillery is supposed to sound like." He didn't add the other thought that had slid, cold and precise, into place beside it. If they could make 1 second do that much, they could also stop spending 30 seconds pulverizing every house and field around a target, trying to catch men who had already run. Surprise didn't just kill more soldiers. Done right, it might finally kill fewer civilians. Chapter 2 would be about what happened when he tried to push that ugly, beautiful math beyond his own battalion, into a system that understood tonnage and schedules and standard procedures. But not yet the idea that you could kill more of the men you meant to hit with fewer shells, and leave fewer ghosts standing in doorways just by deciding that all your steel would arrive in the same heartbeat. For 2 days after the farmyard vanished in 1 second, Keene waited for someone to tell him he'd broken the rules. Nobody did. The only immediate consequence was that the infantry started asking for him by name. The captain, whose company had been sitting opposite that farm complex, came into the fire direction center that evening, still dusted with white plaster and other people's roof tiles. He slapped his helmet down on the table so hard, it made the pencils jump. "What the hell did you people just do?" he demanded. 1 second we're bracing for the usual. Whistles, first rounds, everyone hits the deck. And instead, it's like somebody dropped the whole sky on them at once. And then, nothing. No walking barrage, no second wave. Just off. Morales opened his mouth, grinning, ready to brag. Keene cut in first. "Time on target," he said. "We stopped sending them a warning shot." The infantry captain stared at him. "You always been able to do that?" he asked. "On paper?" Keene said. "For years. In practice? We just stopped pretending soon was good enough." The captain looked at the map on the wall, at the little grease pencil X where the farm had been. "My boys were 20 minutes from going up against whatever came out of that gate," he said quietly. "Whatever you called it. Buy your math a drink for me." He left without saluting, too tired and too grateful to remember ceremony. When he was gone, Morales looked at Keene. "You know word's going to get around," he said. "I'm counting on it," Keene said. "The math doesn't help anyone if it dies in my notebook. Word in a war spreads in 3 ways. Whispers from men who've seen something, gripes from men who haven't, and messages with signatures at the bottom. The whispers came first. Observers on other hills asked, cautiously over the net, if Able Battalion was the outfit that did that thing with the clocks. Battery commanders swapped stories about that one mission where the yard just vanished. Infantry officers stopped complaining when Keene insisted on time checks before particularly important support. The gripes followed. Some battery officers hated the extra hassle. "Jesus, Dan," one of his peers groused over bad coffee a week later. "You're turning a perfectly good fire when ready into a goddamn symphony. My men are exhausted. They don't want to be human stopwatches." "Tell them to complain to the Germans," Keene said. "I hear they're very understanding about inefficient barrages." But the third method, messages with signatures, arrived sooner than he'd expected. Late in January, a jeep from division headquarters pulled up in a spray of mud. Out climbed a major with clean boots and a permanently irritated expression. He ducked into the dugout, shook off the rain, and got straight to the point. "Captain Keene," he said. "Yes, sir." The major held up a folder stuffed with forms and thin onion skin copies. "I've been reading your fire mission reports," he said. "You're doing something strange." "That's a broad statement, sir," Keene said. The major flipped the folder open. "Time on target mission, all batteries, observed effect, complete destruction of enemy company, minimal collateral." He glanced up. "That phrase appears more often in your paperwork than anyone else's. Corps Artillery wants to know why." Morales, in the corner, suddenly found something fascinating to do with a pencil. Keene wiped his hands on his trousers, reached for his notebook, and opened it to the messy columns that had kept him awake for a week. "Sir," he said, "with respect, we've been fighting this war like time is free." He tapped the page. "Every shell has a time of flight. Every gun has a crew delay. We know those numbers. We just mostly ignore them. We fire when we're ready, and we accept that rounds arrive over 10, 20, 30 seconds. The enemy survives on those seconds. We scare them. We don't always kill them." The major's eyebrow twitched. "And you're fixing that by synchronizing watches and doing more arithmetic," he said. "Yes, sir," Keene said. We pick a time, 1400, 23 minutes, 0 seconds. We calculate when each gun must fire, so its shell is over the target exactly then. We correct for crew delay. We drill the crews until fire at 14:22:29 means exactly that. The result is 18 shells landing within a second instead of strung out over half a minute. More work for your men, the major said. Less work for theirs, Keene said. They don't get to run. The major glanced at Morales. Sergeant, is this as insane as it sounds? More, sir, Morales said. But the Germans are the ones bleeding for it. The major closed the folder and stood there for a moment, listening to the guns thump faintly somewhere beyond the dugout wall. All right, he said at last. Division artillery has an offensive scheduled in 3 days. We're to plaster a ridgeline and 2 villages before the infantry jumps. Corps is offering us an extra battalion for that show. That's 4 battalions in all. 48 guns. They want to see if your little circus act scales. Time on target with 48 guns, Morales murmured. Sir, that's a lot more than a bad second. Keene felt something cold and tight settle in his chest. Not fear, exactly. The weight of what could go wrong if even one piece of the math came loose. Sir, he said slowly, if we do this, we need every battery's clocks to be right to the second. No about. No close enough. And we need their crew delays measured. I can't babysit 3 extra battalions worth of loaders. The major handed him a typed sheet. You've got 2 days, he said. Corps will send their FDOs here this afternoon. You brief them. You give them your tables and your method. If this works, someone with more stars than me will be very interested. If it doesn't, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. If it didn't, 48 guns would throw steel into the wrong space at the wrong time, and somewhere out there, another farmhouse would learn what regrettable felt like. The briefing that afternoon felt less like a meeting of officers and more like a support group for reluctant mathematicians. Fire direction officers and battery commanders from 3 battalions squeezed into the dugout, ducking under the low beams. Some were curious. Some were openly skeptical. All were tired. Keene stood in front of the map with his notebook and a piece of chalk. Time on target is not magic, he began. It's subtraction. The tables already tell you time of flight at a given range and charge. You add your crew delay. You subtract that from the H hour you want rounds on target. That gives you your fire time. He sketched it on the board. T fire. T target. T flight. T delay. A captain from another battalion snorted. We're trying to fight a war here, not run a physics class, he said. My men are half asleep as it is. You want us to add another layer of complexity? Keene kept his voice level. How often do your first rounds actually land where the observer wants them? He asked. How often does the enemy have time to hear them and dive for the ditch? How many shells do you throw to keep their heads down that never actually take them out of the fight? The man started to answer, then stopped. Everyone knew the rough numbers. No one liked saying them out loud. You're already doing complexity, Keene said. Range, charge, drift, wear, wind. This is one more column in a table, and it buys you exactly what we pretend we have and don't. Surprise. One of the older majors leaned forward. And you've tested this how many times? He asked. 5 battalion-level missions, Keene said. Dozens at battery level. We've missed our ideal window by 2, 3 seconds occasionally. We still hit closer together than regular fire. We've never been late by 30 seconds. And you think we can keep 48 guns inside 1 second? Another voice challenged. I think we can get them inside 3, Keene said. And 3 seconds of hell is still a lot harder to survive than half a minute of warning. He paused, then added the part he hadn't said out loud yet. And I think if we can put 48 shells into a trench line in 3 seconds, We don't have to spend the next 5 minutes turning every house and field within a mile into splinters. We can start being specific, not just loud. That got a few looks. A couple of men shifted, thinking about farmhouses. The senior major closed his eyes briefly, then opened them. "All right," he said. "We'll test it. One phase of the barrage on the ridge will be a full toe T across all battalions. If it turns that ridge into a bad memory faster, the brass will listen. If it doesn't, at least we've given the Germans something new to talk about." He jabbed a finger at Keane. "You'll be at Division HQ for the fire plan. Bring your tables, bring your watch, leave any miraculous interventions to clergy. We're going to do this with math." The offensive began at dawn under a sky the color of dirty tin. Infantry huddled in shallow start lines, helmets low, rifle slings cutting into their shoulders. Tanks crouched behind hedgerows, their engines rumbling softly. The ridge ahead was a jagged black line, dotted with muzzle flashes. 2 villages sat in the low ground, red roofs peeking through the mist. Division artillery had divided the fire plan into phases. Phase 1, standard harassing fire, smoke, and selective destruction. Phase 2, the experiment. Keane stood in the Division Fire Direction Center, a larger dugout, more maps, more radios, and watched officers move counters across acetate like children pushing toy cars. At H-20 minutes, the first phase began. Shells marched across the ridge, searching for gun pits and suspected bunkers. Smoke blossomed, the usual. Ugly, effective in its way, but predictable. The Germans vanished into their dugouts, shutters slammed, cellars filled. At H-2 minutes, the order went out to shift to Phase 2. "Time on target mission," the artillery colonel said, his voice clipped. "All battalions. Objective, enemy trench line on forward slope of ridge, grid 8311. H-hour for TOT, 0615 or. Confirm time check. Mark." Keane looked at his watch. The second hand swept past the 12 exactly as a dozen other second hands did the same in other dugouts and command posts. For the next 90 seconds, the world in that room shrank to numbers. Ranges, charges, time of flight entries in the tables. Keane and 3 other FDOs hunched over their pads, barely looking up, each calculating fire times for their batteries, adding crew delays, subtracting from 6:15 days. Battery A, fire at 6:14:33. Battery B, fire at 6:14:29. Battery C. Orders crackled out over the net. Outside, in muddy gun parks, loaders braced shells on their thighs and waited, sweat already freezing on their faces. The ridge lay quiet for a moment, almost peaceful under drifting smoke. The Germans, hearing the first phase of shelling lift, began to do what doctrine told them. Climb out of their holes, man the trenches, prepare to meet the infantry when they came. Some of them even stretched. On the American side, the infantry companies fixed bayonets and hitched packs, waiting for the whistle that would send them walking into machine gun sight lines, a routine that had killed too many men in too many wars. Keane watched the second hand creep. 06:14:20. Battery B, stand by, fire! Somewhere to the rear, 6 guns bellowed. 6:14:24. Battery A, fire! Another 6 tongues of flame. Other voices overlapped with his, other battalions working their own clocks. In the trenches on the ridge, German sergeants squinted through the smoke, trying to see what the Americans were doing. They had survived countless barrages. They knew the rhythm. First the ranging shots, then the walk, then the lift. They had seconds, usually, between the first faint whistle and the blast landing near their boots. A few of them heard the scattered coughing of American guns far back and frowned. It sounded out of step. Closer together, harder to count. On Keane's watch, the second hand climbed. 06 at 14:57. He found himself whispering under his breath, "Come on, be right." At 06:15, the ridge line simply erupted. It was not the ragged roll of a normal barrage. It was as if a giant hand had slapped the hillside. 48 shells, give or take the human fractions of error, arrived on the trench grid within a tight, vicious window. Observers later said it looked like the ridge had tried to jump. Dirt, timber, sandbags, and men went up in a single dirty wave. Some shells burst right over the parapets, showering the trenches with steel. Others plunged into dugouts that had just been opened and were full of men climbing out. There was no first shell to warn them. No one more cigarette before the serious stuff started. In the start lines, American infantry saw the ridge vanish behind a wall of smoke and dust. Jesus, one,